Hi everyone, you're listening to The Way of Soul Remembering with Tom Llewellyn, where we give the space for people to authentically share their spiritual journeys and inspire with what they've learned. I'm really happy to have back with us Lisa Frideborg, who's a metaphysician, a Christian mystic, a tarot reader. So really happy to have her back with us. And for people that listened to the first episode where Lisa was with us, one of the things we touched upon at the end of the video was just the emergence of the feminine really back into spirituality. And I noticed that a lot. I mean, my partner Lena, who some of you will know, spends so much time running women's circles, and there seems to be a real sort of upsurgence of women that are taking on the role of facilitators and teachers as well. So it'd be wonderful just to sort of to hear your thoughts about that, Lisa.
Yeah, it is wonderful to see. And at the same time, you have the Catholic Church obviously denying women the role of priesthood. So, and I sometimes wonder if that is ever going to change. But then, if you go back in history, there are figures like Hildegard of Bingen and Julian of Norwich, and Hildegard in particular. I mean, she had a lot of power. She would dictate to emperors and even the Pope what ought to be done, completely shamelessly. And so, yeah, there's always been powerful women, but I think there's more of an awareness in our day and age of the need for women to rise up and to take on leadership roles and to speak up on behalf of the environment. And the reason I think is because women have this really strong connection to nature and nature's cycles. We're lunar creatures, for obvious reasons. So yeah, there's that. But yeah, one of the reasons I left the church and then eventually started labeling myself a Christian witch was that I came across people like Hildegard of Bingen, and I looked at her and I thought, well, she was totally a witch. She was working with herbs and crystals and like tuning into the vibes of things to be able to get that kind of information. Now, I will say I would not call her a witch, definitely not to her face. That would have consequences. And I wouldn't actually use that title about myself anymore either. But that was kind of like a phase I went through to kind of navigate this this uprising of the divine feminine within myself, I guess. And I think that's why we see a lot of people identifying as witches as well, because looking back in history, that's where you see feminine power in terms of spirituality.
Absolutely. I think there's always been incredible women of power, and it's such a massive area to go into. But one thing that sometimes interested me, and I know this might be a bit of a pokey comment and some listeners will completely disagree with what I'm saying, but I've never been that comfortable with the word witch for some reason, because I think it comes from an old Anglo-Saxon word or root of the word wit, and wit means crooked or bent. So I remember some well-known occultists in the 20th century, and if people want to know who I'm talking about, I can reference him, really well-known occultists, and they were encouraging people more to maybe talk about words like Wicca are sometimes easier in a way. Not that I'm saying everyone, to get into being a practitioner of Wicca, but that word has more of a sense of craft or weaving, or really like a connection with the interconnectedness of things. Because even in pre-Christian times, in more like pagan Britain, when the Anglo-Saxons were here, there were witches, but they were sometimes they were not well thought of, because they would have potentially been, because just like men, women can sometimes abuse power as well. And sometimes in Anglo-Saxon pre-Christian times, people within those communities that were seen as witches, they would not have been treated that well, not because people were necessarily against women, but because they were against the the people that had how to say it, were misusing their powers either through magic or influence or manipulation. So I think that's a really important thing to really to feel about, because as a man sometimes I feel kind of like that although the upsurgence of women power is fantastic, and that's really good in terms of the rebalancing, and of course many of the things that have happened in the destructive things that have happened on the planet Earth in terms of the environment, we have lived in a culture that's been mostly run by men holding senior positions, so it's really wonderful. But I just think it's important to remember that it's not just like, you know, it, of course women can also have that play, you know, in a way of how they relate to both what we could call like the love polarity, or not, the love principle and the power principle. Like in our spiritual life, it's so important to see how we're playing between the dance of those two different things.
Yeah, I agree completely, Tom. I have no objections to anything you said there. Yeah, there's a need for balance and integrating the divine feminine and masculine within our own hearts, and it needs to be in the heart. That's where it needs to be. So yeah, but it's interesting looking back at, because you said about ancient England, you know, obviously I come from Sweden, and in my country we had witches as well during the pre-Viking and Viking era. They were known as vulvas. And it was very mixed reception among the general sort of public, because they were revered and feared, and scorned and kind of praised at the same time, you know. And I suppose it would depend on their reputation as individuals as well. But I think they traveled around, and they usually had sort of a retinue of female servants with them, who were also kind of like co-witches who took part in the ceremonies and things like that. But yeah, I got really into Old Norse tradition and religions sort of toward the end of 2020, and dedicated a year to like serious studies of my own kind of pagan roots.
Wow.
If that was a path that I actually, that would be a good fit that I could follow. But after a while it just started disintegrating, and I did work with the deities, and that's, you know, I already knew that pagan deities were real before that. But it's like, I think if you're with Christ, if you're in Christ, if you've been grafted into the vine, they kind of tend to reject you after a while as well, when they realize that you're not gonna like reject Christ fully. You know, it's not a fit. It can never be a fit. So yeah, that didn't work. But I enjoyed learning more about the runes, and just learning the history and diving deep into the different practices, and just understanding how my nation came to be, you know, how Sweden came to be Sweden. Because if you only get the Christian part of the history, you don't really understand the psyche of the Swedish people. So yeah, that was good.
Yeah, that's one thing that I wanted to ask you about, in terms of more about, there seems to be something, when I hear about you're talking about your spiritual journey, there seems to be something something that's always bringing you back to Christ, bringing you back to Christianity. Although you're learning other things, you're coming back to that as a center. And it's interesting what you were saying just now, because of course in one of the Gospels, Christ makes the point of, or in the recorded Gospels, talking about how it's difficult to serve two masters, as it were. So that tension between, if your heart's being called back to a center of something, but you're kind of moving towards another, let's say pagan or other Celtic deity or something, and then how after a while they'll be like, look, you know, Lisa, you're probably just a Christian. Probably best if you just follow that, because I don't think you're ever going to really commit to working with us full time, as it were. It's interesting. But did you have was it mostly just an inner sense, like an inner guidance, or did you, or because one thing I'm interested in is like, because I think the one thing that can really happen is just when we know when we feel good within ourselves, we know when we're really feeling like, yeah, this is me, this is what's giving me my full potential to really emerge. And
It's me, not
sometimes
me.
if we're exploring things, like I've explored a lot of Eastern practices and they're wonderful in terms of the techniques and stuff, but sometimes I think like it's almost like I'm adding on something to myself rather
Yeah,
than
you're making it more
actually finding
complicated.
what's within, as it were.
Yeah, I know exactly. Actually, I'd like to tie in with a lecture from your Christian mysticism course here about Swedenborg, because it's really about that flow of love from source, from God, that one consciousness, that one mind, that it's not me, there's nothing separate, that sense of not being separate. I couldn't get that from anything other than Christ. Okay, so that, like, really listening to you talk about Swedenborg really made that click for me, so thank you for that. So and then that sense of that love being, it's all grace, you know, it's all grace, and it's just, you know, I can breathe again, you know. Simple.
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful to hear. So it's lovely to talk to you, Lisa, about this feeling of really finding your spiritual home, as it were, and really honoring what that home is. And one of the things that we can kind of find as we're connecting more to our inner home is that it might be in our spiritual journey. If we're open to it, it won't come for everyone, but you might find that certain sort of past life feelings or associations are coming through. I've definitely had this. I've definitely had this before with past life memories coming through. Sometimes when I was visiting, let's say, some old medieval cities in Britain, like strong memories and feelings of remembering certain identities that we've had in the past. So could you maybe share a little bit about how you've experienced these sort of memories coming through, and what's that meant for you in your life?
Yeah, I, as a Christian, I was told to not believe in past lives, but that just never made sense to me. There are a lot of things that never made sense to me, like astrology is evil. I'm like, but that's just how things work, you know. So I never put that aside completely. But yeah, so for past lives, it wasn't until after I'd left the church, when I was in my sort of early 30s, that I really started looking into that. And I remember reading this book, Journey of Souls, by some doctor who did like research into past lives. He interviewed people about past lives and lives between lives as well. And then I started opening up more to kind of exploring that for myself, but never putting too much of an emphasis on it, because as a Capricorn, it has to be useful, and just identifying as a bunch of other people didn't seem very useful to me. But yeah, it wasn't long after I started kind of thinking more about these things that I went to see a psychic tarot reader in, where was she? Washington. So up here in the north somewhere. And one of the first things she said to me was, you've had a lot of past lives that were sort of monastic. And I was like, yeah. That's just something I kind of took for granted, you know, not having like dug into any individual sort of past lives along that line, but that made so much sense. And then some years after that, I had a dream vision. And in that dream vision, I was in the Akashic Records, and I was with a friend who I felt like I had a past life connection with as well, a Greek friend. And we were walking through the library, and he pointed up to a book, and it read Pulcharia. And that's not a name I've never heard or seen before. So I reached my hand up and the book fell into my hand. And I woke up just knowing that this was one of my past lives. And then I Googled it, as you do these days. I mean, what did people even do before Google? I mean, how did they find anything out? They probably meditated more. That's probably how. It's probably better as well. But, you know, that's how things tend to work these days. So I found out that she was a co-empress with her brother, with a lot of not just political but religious clout. And somehow I just knew that a lot of these past monastic lives of mine were sort of doing penance for kind of abusing the power I had, possibly in other past lives as well. But yeah, so yeah, it was funny because you were talking about doing penance for something as well. Do you want to share about that?
I don't know.
Kind of.
What was I doing penance for?
Well, I'm not doing penance. That's not the word you use. Let's be fair. Okay, you were saying about being sort of a medieval occultist
Oh,
in the
I
past
see.
life,
Yeah, I
and
felt that
then
was one of these past life memories that came back.
uh,
Definitely when in this life, when I started to develop a little bit of an interest in magic, a little bit of an interest in the occult
mm,
or astral projection. And yeah, just sometimes visiting some of these medieval cities. Um, I don't need to say which one it was, but when I visited this medieval city in the UK, the strong feeling of association started to come back to me, not just about what happened in his life, but also just how he felt in his life, like how he felt in his life as well. And there was a certain, yeah, there was a certain sort of melancholia. I got the sense of someone who had a lot of power, but we had a sort of sadness in a way. And when I was learning more about this past life, I kind of I mean, someone could say this is all just your imagination. Someone
of
could, this is
course.
your imagination running wild here, Tom, you know.
Mm, mm,
But my sense was he was someone who had a lot of power, was maybe
mm,
even the head of an order of some sort, but had, for karmic reasons, had to do certain things in this and that life that maybe brought harm upon others. But
mm.
so at that time, the realm of occultism and secular interest and secular power was quite, you know, interconnected to some
Yeah,
extent. You know, it's probably harder for us, for most average people, to really think these days that secular power in countries like ours might be in any way connected to occultism or anything. I mean, there's a lot of people
but
that
it
think
still is. This is the
there's a lot of people
yeah,
that would argue that it is,
yeah,
but there's this
astrology. They all
perception in the
use.
mainstream
Yeah,
public that it's not.
but it is
But it is.
seriously.
But I know. But anyway, like, so I was feeling into that, and I think it's, and yeah, there is something about really and I was talking to a dear friend of mine, Stevie, who I think is going to come on to this podcast, hopefully in a couple of weeks, about how we as practitioners kind of see where we're at on that in terms of that dance between love, the love mode, and the power mode. Because
Mm,
sometimes I think, as people like me and my good friend Stevie, who tend to be more like nice type people, we
mm,
might be so afraid of the power mode in a way that we kind of disconnect from really the power that we could have in the world.
yeah,
So it's
yeah.
not that the power is bad, it's just being conscious of where you are in relation to
Mm,
that dance between, and that mode between the love mode and the power mode, is, I think.
yeah, yeah. That's good. Yeah.
Um yeah, so that's, so yeah, this past lives. And did you feel connecting to that personality, that did that help you to get a more of a sense of astrology, or were you already interested in astrology at that time?
No, I feel like because you said something about astrology. Actually, it was our talk about astrology where you said you felt like you couldn't like get a handle on it because of that past life. And
Mm,
then it just the penny just sort of dropped for me. Ah, that's why I've struggled with like religion this lifetime so much. Like I want to fit in, but I don't fit in. And it's like it feels karmic, and
mm,
so it probably is.
mm,
But the astrology thing, I might have had past lives where I've used that as well, but I'm not actually aware of any. To me, it just feels like I've come into this lifetime to study esoteric and metaphysical topics and pass everything I learn on. Like I'm doing it, whether I earn money or not from it, I don't really care, because that's what I'm here to do. So I'm just doing it constantly. Anything I learn, I share instantly. And that brings me a great sense of satisfaction, and hopefully other people too. So yeah, and obviously
one thing that I would love to,
yeah.
Sorry to interrupt, but I'd love to chat to you about, I mean, how do you get on, like, talking to other Christians about your interests of astrology? And I mean, because in a lot of church type circles, those things are just like, no, you can't do that stuff.
Exactly how that goes. The last time I tried to go back to church was about 2016, and so that was the Anglican church, and people always want to know what you do for a living, and I always just say what I do. And then people usually just go quiet, you know, like good church folk just say nothing and then change the topic as quickly as possible. But this one lady, she kind of pulled me to one side and she said, you know, you really ought not tell people what you do. And I was like, okay. So that didn't last long. I mean, it kind of went how I expected it to go, to be honest. But I still enjoyed going those few times I did go, and I just love worship. Like, as a type, I would say I'm a Bhakta, you know, because that's where I come alive. I don't really feel alive unless I'm in worship. That's how stark the contrast is. Not fully. I mean, obviously I'm breathing and I'm doing stuff, and some of it feels meaningful, but where it feels like I'm fully alive is in worship. So yeah. So, and I miss having that with other people. I really do, but I can't have it, and that feels karmic. Yeah.
Do you, because I noticed on your website that you said that you were a member of the Nazarene Gnostic order. I mean, if you go back, I mean, do you find
the Order of the White Dove? Yeah, the Order of the White Dove was that was something that Jesus, or Yeshua, shared with me in meditation. He came to me when I was meditating one time, like 18 years ago, I think, and put his hands over my head and said, you are a member of the Order of the White Dove. And I was like, what does that mean? Like, a lot of things that I get through that are really clear are not like the big picture, and that can be really frustrating. But then I'm just like, well, I know I am. I kind of know what it means, and it means that all of us who follow the guidance of the Holy Spirit and who are willing to surrender to that guidance are members of that order, because obviously that's the White Dove is the Holy Spirit. So but yeah, that was pretty cool. I've had one other vision of the Lord, and that was at the time I was thinking about leaving the church. I've been through an evangelical phase, and then I joined the Catholic Church, right? So I don't know how much of that we actually covered in the last episode, but I had an experience in the Catholic Church that was really traumatic during a confessional, and I decided to just leave church altogether. I kind of gave up, and that was back in sort of 97, and I was really sad because church was family to me. And then I had this dream vision where I was next to a waterfall, and I was being lifted up. It felt like the childhood out-of-body experience I had, where hands were like lifting me up. That's kind of how it felt. And at the top of the waterfall, the Lord was enthroned on this huge, massive throne made kind of natural out of rock. And there were no words. He just looked at me, like he looked at me with such love. Speechless. I mean, I can't even put words on it. And then I woke up, and I knew that leaving the church didn't mean leaving Christ, you know. So,
Wow.
yeah.
I don't really know what to say. That's an incredible experience.
Yeah,
that's an incredible thing to flow through into your life. To not feel, although it sounds like you felt alone a little bit leaving the Catholic Church, but that feeling of not alone in spirit, because it's that inflow, that's a lot of
yeah.
That's a beautiful thing to come. That's a beautiful thing to come through to you. I mean, have you found that kind of what in New Age circles would be called sort of Christ consciousness energy, in a way? Like, I know you might not like Christ, how everyone uses the way Christ consciousness, you know.
Well, funnily enough, I use it myself sometimes.
Have you found that Christ consciousness energy has helped? Because I think you've kind of created a system of angelic correspondences. Could you talk a little bit like that for is it within your tarot work? Did you feel that you were being kind of, was that channeled a little bit? Did you feel that was
it was
through?
Channeled a little bit. I don't know to what degree exactly it was channeled. I channel a lot of my writings anyway, because a lot of the time I sit down and I don't know exactly what to write about, and then I just start typing and it just kind of flows through me. That's mostly how I work. But I did have an experience, I think it was 2017, where Metatron came through very strongly. And I just knew I had to do this, like these channelings for the major arcana, to see, you know, what the angelic messages were for each of the 22 trumps. And that was a process that took several years, and I was told it was going to take several years because I wasn't ready to do the later trumps yet. I had to go through my sort of dark night of the soul to I think we have more than one, to be fair, but that was one of them in 2020. And then when I came out of that, I was ready to continue the work and complete it. So it's been completed. So yeah, those are my own kind of correspondences, but there are angelic correspondences going back to other systems as well. And then there's a complete system for minor arcana angelic correspondences based on the 72 names of God that I'm really drawn to work with. So I'm kind of in the process of blogging those now, and doing work that I haven't seen anywhere else, which is to actually relate the meaning of each angel to each of the minor arcana cards, so that people can work with these cards in a more meaningful way, hopefully. So yeah, so I'm ever since, I would say about 2003, I've been working with Raphael, Michael, Gabriel, and Uriel. And then eventually I started working with other angels as well. But yeah, those four have been with me. And I sometimes, you know, feel like I'm channeling angels. Of course, like you said, someone could say I'm just imagining, but there's no proof. I don't claim to, you know, have any. But I have actually seen Archangel Michael. I've actually seen him, and I've had it confirmed that it was him I saw, because and this is a funny thing, when I'm receiving healing from other people, I tend to go into a deeper state of awareness and tend to see the spirit guides that they're working with, or angels. In this instance, it was a huge blue angel stood next to the Reiki healer who's giving me healing. And after, I was like, wow, you know, did you know you have this massive blue angel right next to you when you're working? And she's like, yeah, I always call on Archangel Michael before I start. And I was like, wow, this is so cool. But yes, I'm not the most clairvoyant person, but yeah, that's when I've always had the ability to have it confirmed as well. Like, I'll describe someone's spirit guide and they'll say either like, yeah, I know, or they'll say like, yeah, someone else described exactly the same. So, you know, that's quite cool.
It sounds like a beautiful experience. Yeah, I've had encounters, not exactly direct encounters with Archangel Michael, but he's definitely come through when I've needed him to. I used to, well, I still feel close to her in a way. I had this beautiful Christian, really beautiful Christian friend when I used to live in another city in the UK, and she was an incredible person, and she used to go for evening prayer each night. She did it all of the time, morning prayer, evening prayer in the church, often on her own, just prayer and in contemplation. And I had done I had helped a friend who is an alcoholic. I'd done a sort of energy clearance for him because I felt that there was a spirit that was kind of prompting him to drink, like prompting him to drink a lot and sort of manipulating him in a way. And anyway, I did this energy clearance, but this spirit was then bothering me quite a lot. Like it was very upset that I'd done this. I'd started to disconnect him a bit from my dear friend, John, who's now in the spirit realm. But I'd asked my friend, who also knew my friend, who had a bit of a drink issue, so she knew him, and I asked her to pray. And I was lying in bed, and I was almost being attacked, a little bit agitated by this spirit. It was very angry at me, and then he just vanished from the room, just like completely vanished. And I turned and looked at the clock, and it was the exact time that she was in evening prayer. And I asked her about it afterwards, and she said, yes, at that time, I prayed to Archangel Michael to come through to help John in terms of this spirit form, and just yeah. Wow. So that was one meaningful kind of experience related to Archangel Michael that I've had.
Brilliant.
But he did have a presence in that part of the city, and even the church was named that. It was the church of St. Michael. Yeah. So he had that sort of presence in the land anyway.
Oh, by the way, on your course, I love what you shared about Padre Pio. So I did some research on him, and he had some encounters with Archangel Michael, apparently. 3 very memorable ones. I haven't finished my research yet, but I thought that was really interesting.
Oh, yeah, I think so. He seemed to have angels with him a lot of the time, and some of the stories are quite funny though, because sometimes Padre Pio was really struggling with dark entities in his room, and there are these funny stories where the archangel did not intervene to help him, or his guardian angel did not intervene. So then Padre Pio would literally be rebuking his guardian angel. It was like, where were you? Where were you? Did you not see how much I was struggling?
Yeah.
Some of these higher angels, they have a real sort of divine humor about them in a way, if that makes sense. And you were relating blue angels. I had an incredible encounter with a blue angel once. It was really like, and I haven't put him into the course yet. Not that I'm going to put this blue angel into the course. That would be really hard. But it happened when I was reading a text by Jacob Boehme, a great German mystic. And there was a text, and it was basically just saying that at some point you need to realize there's a greater power than you. You need to realize there's a greater power than just yourself, in a way. And that might sound obvious, but I think sometimes it's difficult for us to surrender that in a way. But when I just said, yes, I accept, or I agree that this blue angel manifested in my bedroom, and it was an incredible experience, just because of its energy and what it presented to me, and there was this telepathic communication. It gave me really beautiful teachings, and one of the teachings that it gave me was like to not to realize that other people have suffered because of their path in the past, to not wallow in self-pity, which we can do a little bit sometimes. And it was showing me these images of how he showed me this image of a I think it was probably it was in the time of the religious wars in Europe, and it was someone, let's say, either Catholic or Protestant, but they were being led on the side of a ravine by guards or something, and they were being led to their death probably. So it's a really strong sort of teaching of how other people, not just ourselves, have had these struggles in our lives, and sort of to stay with what's true, within us, and not sort of get caught into self-pity. But anyway, at some point I will try and put Jacob Boehme a little bit onto the course, because he's a wonderful, fantastic mystic to get into. And I know that you said in one of your messages recently that you were getting into William Law, the great English mystic.
Yeah, I haven't had much time to research his writings since then, but I really liked what you shared about him. I did look him up, and he's an Aries. Of course. But yes, I look forward to learning more from him and about him. Yeah.
Jacob Boehme is an interesting. He was a lot more influential than people realized. I think he really helped to influence the early Quakers, the Quaker movement. I mean, he was William Law's master. William Law just completely. And anyway, maybe we need to talk about a couple of other things. So, where shall we go to? You said before that you sometimes keep journals. I mean, have you kept journals over a long period of time? Because I was finding it so interesting over the last week or so in my own personal practice to look through my old dream journals from years ago, like decades ago. And sometimes, and I was really reflecting, I was like, oh my God, like I should have listened. I was having lucid dreams that were giving me teachings like about 12 years ago that are completely relevant to me now.
Yeah.
And I was thinking, oh my God, like I should have gone through this stuff a while ago, because I was finding it really psychologically integrating to look through that old material, as it were. But have you done that? Do you keep sort of old journals? Do you go back to the stuff?
Yes, I've always kind of done it sporadically, though, both with dream journals and other types of journals. So, but yes, I agree completely when I've looked back, especially dream journals, and wow, that was a really strong dream, and why did I forget, kind of thing. But then again, I mean, we have a lot to remember, and we're being bombarded with information all the time in this day and age as well. So I think with dream work, you really have to make it a conscious priority. And sometimes I feel like that is a priority, and a lot of the time I just don't have the time and energy, unfortunately, which is really, I do want to do it more. Especially I want to learn how to go lucid more sort of at will, because it's just really wonderful. I mean, it might be just like an egoic reason for wanting to do it, but I do think you can. I think you can learn a lot as well. And like I said, anything I learn, I pass on. So yeah.
One thing that I've been encouraged people to do, and I do it a lot myself these days, is I record. I know that I don't necessarily want to sit down and record my dreams by hand in the morning. And I certainly don't want to go onto the computer and write them out, because I want to be doing spiritual practices or go for my morning walk. So what I tend to do is I take not my smartphone, but like a tiny dictaphone. And then when I'm going out and doing my practice or walk, I just record the dream or experience in the audio, and then I write them up later. I just find it's a little bit of an easier way to do it than always be sitting down writing your experiences, which you may or may not want to do at that time.
No, that's very true. And I think walking prayer and walking meditation, and yeah, it can be very useful as well. Just doing like, yeah, I like to combine, get more work in.
So maybe one thing that I'd just like to touch upon, and this is probably something that goes way beyond what we can talk about here, but it's an interesting theme nonetheless, because we haven't talked that much about the tarot. And I mean, do you have feelings about how the tarot sort of emerged? I know it's a massive area, but in terms of the history, because people can have such different perspectives on it. Some people will say that it came from Egypt, or it was, some people even believe it was channeled first by it was channeled from other dimensions. Other people believe that it came, you know, what's your sort of take on it?
I think it comes very much from the collective unconscious mind of the people of its time when it surfaced in the Mediterranean region. So sort of late Middle Ages, early Renaissance, and it's a mix of a Christian iconography and pagan iconography. So, you know, we just don't really know, and that's okay. I mean, I've read a lot of books that are trying to tie it to different systems, like the Cathars, or to Mary Magdalene, or to, you know, so some would say it comes from the Middle East and the Mamluk cards. Some would say actually no, it probably comes from China originally, Egypt, as you said, but we just don't know. There's no evidence, and that's okay. I'm totally fine with that. What is clear is that, you know, what we have to realize is that there is no separation. You know, the collective unconscious is the one mind, and when we tap into that one mind, we channel relevant, meaningful, symbolic information through. And the tarot is one of those systems, I think, that's been channeled through that way. I think astrology has as well. It's not a pure science. It's something that mankind has channeled through from the higher realms or lower realms, whatever you want to call it, of consciousness. The one mind, you know, it's a one mind kind of tool, and that's why we can use it to tap into the one mind.
No, that's wonderful. That's wonderful to think that we can tap into that one mind, and it can flow and be useful for people in different ages. One thing that I found interesting when looking about how the tarot iconography may have been connected to even Christian iconography at the time, in sort of more in that sort of time in Europe, is that how the iconography of the fool is quite similar to the iconography of the pilgrim, like the spiritual pilgrim, and the fool, and how that was meaningful for me in terms of a little bit about what we were talking about a day or so ago, about how it's so important to keep a sort of beginner's mind, but also like a sense of humor as well.
Yes.
From the, you know, in our spiritual practice.
That's very true. Yeah.
You know,
yeah, that's very true.
So even having conversations like this, that can be like, oh my God, we need to be very serious. We need to say very profound things.
Yeah. No.
You know what I mean? Like how to keep that sense of humor alive. But I think it's important in our culture because, yeah, that sense of laughter or humor like, I sometimes used to say that like life was too serious to take too seriously. If you see,
definitely.
You know what I mean? Like we have to keep that sense of humor, humor alive, and then that might be.
Angels can fly because they take themselves lightly, as the saying goes.
No, that's wonderful. So we'll probably just end at that point. But if people want to connect more to Lisa, there'll be links to her website, so you can go over and connect to her more and find out more about her fantastic work. But thank you so much for coming along and just being on here to chat again. It's been really good.
Yeah, it's been my pleasure, Tom. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.